Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, private space corporations like SpaceX, Blue Origin, and Virgin Atlantic are doing their best to be able to do good things for our world, galaxy, and universe. This looks like innovation in harnessing new kinds of technologies like reusable rockets, space tourism, suborbital flights, and intergalactic exploration. A lot of these kinds of things do use a lot of artificial intelligence and military grade technology in order to be able to send these things out into orbit and even use some of these specialized technologies on the battlefield, things that work in space but can also be used in domestic conflict at home. These are all fine and well, but we understand these particular companies, especially private companies, are profit driven, margin sensitive, and ultimately, in terms of management, non governmental entities or enterprises that run in parallel and simultaneous with international and domestic space programs. Things which involve different countries, which include but are not limited to the International Space Station, things which are a joint interest of the United States and other kinds of countries, or even things we might not necessarily be privy to, like the Chinese and Russian space program. That is to say that regulatory oversight and the compliance to such, which I call the rules of the game, are ultimately important and akin to following the Geneva Conventions and traditional warfare that we have on the ground and on the seas in order to be able to protect the particular interests and be able to manage a lot of their conflicting or competing desires for power in order for this to be able to make the most important use of economic and human resources as well of time. I'll take you later, don't have to say it again. Because time, especially for dealing with things in space, because of the interstellar nature of the space-time continuum, is of ultimate importance. And ironically enough, these long-term mission goals, which in many instances may even be outside our lifetime, cost a lot, have a lot at stake, and take quite some time. This is a value judgment debate from the lens of a neutral observer in terms of how can these independent private corporations reach their long-term goals faster, given that's their mission. And we believe that strong compliance to regulatory protocol is of utmost importance, especially when a lot of these CEOs like Elon Musk themselves constantly want to change their mind, want to change particular things, and given their fail-fast nature of how these corporations often operate, ultimately push them to sometimes cut corners and even step on other individuals. Before I move on, go, POI, I'll take it.
You talk about the Geneva Convention, but unless you frame out long-term missions to literally be war in space, you can never construct that on your case like that.
I'm saying that the Geneva Conventions apply to war, but we have certain protocol and certain rules that we follow when being able to go into space and the norms that involve being able to deal with a lot of those complexities. Number one, what exactly are these long-term mission goals? These long-term mission goals include but are not limited to simple things like being able to clean up certain space debris, being able to discover new planets and chart those under your intellectual property and jurisdiction, and even explore existing ones we have. That is to say, they definitely have local and domestic implications on planet Earth anytime we do something international. Things like being able to decide your flight plan or who goes into orbit for interplanetary travel, or even simple things like being able to take off and land. Are you gonna land in Houston? Are you gonna land in Guangzhou? That is to say, where you go, especially in interplanetary travel, is also of utmost importance. A, making sure that you're not on a collision course to be able to collide with another satellite or another kind of spacecraft. B, being able to do this in the most cost-efficient way possible, wherein you don't have unnecessary mission iterations and ultimately create the space debris, which we ultimately know as a lot of these satellites being lost and broken up into orbit that contribute to things like climate change and even ultimately fall in the ocean, an area known as Point Nemo, and these ultimately important sides of the world, and ultimately C, being able to share kinds of information with the government to be able to make sure that you're documenting potential extraterrestrial things or even new kinds of technology. That is to say, the second part of the argument is to be able to talk about why this particular compliance is important. Because a lot of these particular CEOs and people in charge want to be able to change it up. Space race type shit, right? In order to be able to assert the hard and soft power that they have over their company, and even incongruent or in parallel with other space protocol from other agencies. That is to say, there are geopolitical ramifications in terms of not necessarily coordinating, and we think that it's quite important in many instances that they do things like cutting corners and cost cutting, or not necessarily complying to certain international protocol that can lead to millions upon millions of dollars being lost and even human life. That is to say, the push we have from opening government is that we need to be able to have regulatory oversight and existing rules of the game in order to allow these long-term space missions to have a chance at being successful, while also managing the resources we have that are scarce and also the very valuable human capital we have. We are very proud to open this debate from side proposition.